Welcome back. You're watching Global Today. President William Ruto and Sudan leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan met at State House on Monday evening. The meeting came barely 6 months after Burhan led an onslaught against President Ruto over the ongoing conflict in neighboring Sudan. In the Monday meeting, that significantly eased tensions that had built up between the two regional leaders. The security situation and the urgent need for a solution was discussed. KTN's political affairs reporter David Mudoka has details of that meeting between President Ruto and General al-Burhan, who until recently could not see eye to eye.
On Monday, Sudan leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan flew to Nairobi to meet President William Ruto. General al-Burhan's trip to Kenya came just months after he led a fierce onslaught against President Ruto, who chairs a quartet formed by IGAD to mediate peace in Sudan, accusing Ruto of siding with his nemesis, RSF leader Mohamed Hamdani, in the ongoing Sudan conflict. The trip also comes days after President Ruto and General al-Burhan briefly met on the sidelines of the Saudi Africa Summit in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a meeting that had been arranged following a series of back channels between Nairobi and Khartoum. General al-Burhan was hosted by President Ruto at State House, where the two held lengthy bilateral talks over the security situation in Sudan and in the process easing the tension that had simmered between the two leaders for months. Soon after the meeting, President Ruto released a statement in which the two leaders recognized the slow progress of the Jeddah peace process. Noting the urgent need to find a solution and avert a further loss of lives and property, President Ruto and General al-Burhan agreed to work towards convening an urgent IGAD summit to find ways to accelerate the Jeddah process towards the cessation of hostilities and humanitarian assistance. The two leaders also agreed that a framework for an all-inclusive Sudanese dialogue will be discussed at the summit. The violent conflict in Sudan broke out in April this year and has so far left more than 9,500 people dead and 3 million others displaced. David Muthoka, KTN News, Nairobi.
And from Sudan to South Sudan, where South Sudan is taking the mantle of the East African community amid pressure to show more integration credentials by giving more attention to programs of the bloc. And President Salva Kiir, who is due to become the new chair of the EAC summit, replacing Burundi's President Evariste Ndayishimiye, whose one-year tenure came to an end mid this year, could either use the position to prove doubters wrong or expose the soft underbelly of Juba on regional scale. South Sudan is facing persistent criticism from the EAC over its aloofness. A section of South Sudan lawmakers in the East African Legislative Assembly say the country's Minister for East African Community and Affairs, Deng Alog, does not attend Parliament. And of course, we shall be looking at this and a lot of other issues as far as the East African communities also paying up their obligations to the community itself, which has been wanting for a while. But let's just buckle down to that. Let us develop it. First of all, begin with the earlier story on the Sudan, and now that they are circling back, they can actually see eye to eye with President William Ruto. You know, they are taking special umbrage because they were saying Kenya seems to be, at least the way it looks right now, they were bipartisan. We can begin with you, Dr. Amboge.
Oh, well, I think the coming together of President Ruto and the leader of one of the factions in Sudan is a welcome relief for the region. And the direction the whole thing was taking earlier was a little bit worrying. Now, what is beginning to be clear is that as a country, and probably the framers of the President Ruto's foreign policy, we need some level of consistency in what we say and what we do, particularly in our attempts in bringing regional peace to the table in the negotiations. And the current geopolitics, and I have colleagues here probably who are better placed to make a comment on that, is like the influence of Kenya is probably increasingly waning in some way. And probably that is what President Ruto was trying to do, to reassert what one could loosely see as Kenya's hegemony in the region, particularly in facilitating the peacemaking processes. And this is a position probably that we have enjoyed for a while. If those are the attempts, I think to some extent they are welcome. But I think it is important to have some level of consistency in what we do and say, particularly with regard to the peace and stability in the region. Yes.
All right, Dr. Kanenje.
I think the president has had a fairly couple of rough weeks, and this was no exception. But this particular move, I think it's something that is laudable. Kenya is supposed to be chairing that process with regard to engagement in Sudan. It is something we've always advocated for with regard to bringing the process back home, back to EGAD and African Union, and, under the African Union endorsement. And we are happy that actually the government has made headway. We know it's not been easy, in part because of the perceptions, but we also understand things in Jeddah, they are not exactly flowery. Things have stalled for a while. The battleground seems to be shifting very fast, which may have informed perhaps part of the desire for the Sudanese government to engage Kenya. But to the extent that they've accepted, I think you need to give it up to the president. And I think PSC Ngoe has also been doing an incredible job. Now, what we hope is to build mechanisms and establish a framework that is going to not only bring it back to EGAD and Kenya's leadership in that, but certain steps that actually need to be followed through very quickly, because things are falling apart very quickly in Sudan, to ensure that we take back that initiative again that I think we had lost. And so kudos to the president and for the work that is being done. And what I hope is that this is going to contribute to cessation of hostilities, as well as permitting humanitarian assistance, because as we talk about other theaters of the world now brought in conflict, Sudan has almost been forgotten. And I think this is a welcome move again.
Indeed. Peter Kagwanja.
Well, the Sudan issue need to be understood at two levels. First, of course, there's the IGAD initiative to resolve that case. And second, there is the AU initiative. And both initiatives are African initiatives. Then there is a third initiative, which is the gender process, Jeddah, meaning in Saudi Arabia, which is basically Arab-led. And because Sudan is assumed generally to be an Arab country. Now, what brought Burhani to Nairobi is to revitalize the IGAD process. Because the AU process cannot fly, because the chair of the African Union, Mohammed, is very closely interlinked with the web of conflict around Chad, Sudan, where the opponent is coming from, Hamdani. So that what now is at issue is the fact is an intricate issue, because Sudan is supposed to be the chair of IGAD. It's the chair of IGAD because when Prime Minister Hamdok was in power, he was elected the chair of IGAD. At the same time, President Ruto was appointed the chair of the mediation group. So it's only the two who can sit down and resolve this issue. In a way, one, to re-establish the power of IGAD as a mediator, and two, to legitimize the position of President William Ruto as a mediator. So that in itself is very, very important. Why is it important? Because the AU does not resolve conflict on the African continent. It follows the lead of the major regional economic community. In this particular case, the economic community, the regional bloc we are talking about is IGAD. And it is IGAD that is going to give power to the African Union, if at all the African Union is coming to resolve this. It is the same crisis you find in Ethiopia, and I'm sure we might talk about it. Yeah. Because Ethiopia is itself on the headquarters of the African Union, and at the same time it has been, the Secretary General of IGAD is Ethiopian. And therefore the two bodies find themselves toothless in regard to dealing with this. That's why Obasanjo coming in and Uhuru Kenyatta coming in made a huge difference at that time. So what is the point here? I think both William Ruto and Burhani, I would use this word, without much lamentation, are greenhorns on African politics, Pan-African politics. They are greenhorns because President Kenyatta President Ruto has just come in. And Burhani has never been on an African stage. He has never been president before. And therefore, they crashed at a time because of their different way of not understanding how African diplomacy works. African diplomacy is not a megaphone diplomacy. Even when you differ, it has to be behind the curtains kind of diplomacy. Quiet diplomacy, as it has been called. So both of them went out of their way to engage in megaphone diplomacy rather than on the quiet African diplomacy. And in Africa, whether you look at Zimbabwe and South Africa, in South Africa, or whether you look at West Africa, Nigeria always goofs when it comes to megaphone diplomacy, like the one the new president embarked on. But when you go quiet like they have done, then you see a lot of movement and a lot of process solving issues at that level. So now they have come back to the original point that both have to come together and begin to engage on some quiet diplomacy and get Sudan on track, get IGAD on track. So the outcome of this meeting, the main outcome is one, the strengthening of IGAD as a regional peace broker, and two, the strengthening of the hand of President William Ruto as a broker in the peace in Sudan on behalf of IGAD.
Right.
Yes. Well, I think at the beginning, when this conflict broke out in April this year, the general expectation was that Burhan, with his strong military force, would be able to subdue and become the victor. He didn't want, at that particular moment, the Sudan National Army and his role to be put on an equal footing diplomatically with that of the RSF, led by Mohamed Dagalo, Mohamed Dagalo. And there was a propaganda campaign to discredit the role of our president as a mediator, because he was seen by the IGAD nations and by the international community as the best person who could handle this particular issue. So now it looks as if there's a shift in the military power balance. General Burhan is having it a hard time. The going is getting tough, and the RSF has made some major advances in the capital city in Khartoum. It controls the most of Darfur region, the border with Chad, and has access to Central African Republic to get supplies from organizations like the Wagner. The other thing is that in the Arab world and the Jeddah process has serious problems, because some of the major players involved in that particular campaign have taken sides. They're either for the general or for RSF. They're divided. So I think Burhan is now seeing that his grip on the country is slipping away, and he wants to find a diplomatic solution, a ceasefire. And the only person who can deliver that now, and the only organization that can do that, is IGAD. And the president, William Ruto, who's been very patient, has now come in, and I think he's traveling to Nairobi to consult the president to restart the the discussions under the umbrella of IGAD is most welcome, and because IGAD has an experience, it consists of the most countries that surround Sudan, including Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Kenya, and I think that that is good for the Horn of Africa and the East Africa region, to be able for us to engage and resolve our own problems rather than leave them for outsiders.
Indeed. All right, let's head over to now Ethiopia. Dr. Kanenje, you had actually commented on it, right?
Which one? Ethiopia?
On this Sudan?
I already did.
Oh, already did.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure that you did that. Now, rebels from Ethiopia's Oromia region also said on Monday they were in Tanzania for a second round of talks with the Ethiopian government to try to end decades of fighting. The negotiations come more than 6 months after a first round of discussions between the Oromo Liberation Army and Ethiopia's government, which ended without an agreement. And it says that the conflict in recent years has killed hundreds of people and displaced tens of thousands in Ethiopia's most populous region. The OLO said it had delayed announcing the negotiations to make sure its team could get safely from what it called the front lines in Oromia to the venue. An official close to the mediators, who spoke on condition of anonymity, said the talks started last week in Tanzania's commercial capital, Dar es Salaam, and is being facilitated by the Regional Africa Group, IGAD. The OLA is an outlawed splinter group of the Oromo Liberation Front, a formerly banned opposition party that returned from exile after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed himself, an Oromo, took office in 2018. Oromia, which surrounds Addis Ababa, the capital, is home to Ethiopia's largest ethnic Oromo group and more than a third of the country's 110 million people. We want to discuss this just briefly as well. It seems we are in the Horn of region now, in a on the negotiating table. Crisis after crisis surrounding us. DR Congo as well is not in good shape, and now we have Ethiopia, we have Sudan. South Sudan still is not really in a stable condition, as it were. Let's hear from you, Dr. Hassan Kanenje.
I think it is welcome news that the group from OLF and various factions associated with it in talks with the government. And this is because, remember, in recent months, once the conflict with TPLF subsided, we saw the emergency of an insurgency, pretty much, in the Amhara region. And when you're having multiple factions against competing for power, but also challenging the government, ability to restore order, then that becomes disturbing. And so, for those of us in the region, I think this is something we should welcome and support. The rebel group in the Oromo region is one of the oldest, and it has been going on for a very, very long time. Now, despite the fact that the current president has origins in the Oromo, being half Oromia, it still has not solved the questions that have, I think, plagued the Oromo place within the entire Ethiopian society. And so these discussions, I think they are significant. And if they are supported and you're able to strike a deal between that region, then you're going to be left with fewer regions left, especially now the Amhara question, which of course also need to be addressed. And there is increasing resistance and revolt within the Amhara region, who feel in part betrayed by the deal with TPLF. But also, I think there is a sense among them, and especially, remember, during the conflict, you have the Amharas who occupied land that actually belonged to Tigray, Yes, and now they don't want to go back because they look at it as a war body, which they do not want to give up. And so what do you do with them? But there's also another sense that an attempt to bring back the TPLA, for instance, is being done at the expense. Now, that is also going to be another question that IGAD countries need to deal with. Addis Ababa may not exactly be very enthusiastic with regard to any country within IGAD region or IGAD itself trying to mediate or negotiate, because then that's kind of creating some kind of moral or political equivalent, so they may not exactly like that. However, what we can suggest from where we sit is some back channels that are not exactly out there to try and strike some kind of deal that is going to ensure that, for instance, the Amhara who occupied the land in Tigray can move back to the original areas, but also some exchange need to be done there, but at the same time be given certain guarantees within government to ensure they did not revolt. Remember, the Amhara comprise about 27% of Ethiopia's population, so the second largest ethnic group. The reason why most of Ethiopia speak Amharic, because traditionally they formed part of the aristocracy. However, that movement towards, because Ethiopia is a big country, solving the conflict with the Oromo, then we suggest that a new process and front need to be established with the Amhara in diplomatic terms, so that the current war that is going on and revolt does not continue. This is much so also because this region is so heavily armed as a result of the war. And the government's own attempt to disarm them has actually provoked the kind of resistance we are seeing. But Ethiopia may not be able to do it alone without the assistance of neighbors, as well as other international partners, of course, who may have an interest in a more peaceful and prosperous Ethiopia. It is a country potentially that can be growing at double digits just the way it was growing recently before. So I think as a region we need to pay attention and support those processes.
So the provocation, was it exacerbated by the fact that is the nature of a government, the way it has been trying to disarm him? Or they will have done it better calling out for an amnesty?
Yeah, the Amhara did not feel, at least based on what we understand, represented in the negotiations that took place in Pretoria, South Africa. And so they didn't feel they were part of the deal, which they think it was to their detriment in certain aspects, because in part, they had occupied other people's land and they need to go back. But at the same time, politically, they didn't feel there was nothing that was assured for them, for the blood and the pain that they suffered in the war. And so, to the extent that had already been armed, remember there used to be a massive Amhara militia during the war, and those militias did a lot of damage, and some of the worst atrocities committed in Tigray region also committed by those people. And so this question was not exactly addressed, and so there is fear of reprisals, there is fear of perhaps revenge, both political as well as actual violent revenge, if the kind of deal that has been struck goes ahead, and then TPLF is rehabilitated back into government. And so unless those things are negotiated, it's going to be a challenge.
Right, let's hear from Peter Kagwana.
Yes, I think I have said this before and I really want to repeat it here. Bandaging a wound, and not treating has never been a solution. And I think it's better be added that Ethiopia get that lesson clearly. Now, Ethiopia is trying to reform itself. Yes, the arms solution to the problem has failed. In other words, a battlefront victory that enables the winner to restore what you can call the victor's justice. It's not operating. So Abiy cannot impose in Ethiopia a victor's justice. And being unable to impose a victor's justice or a victor's order has meant that he has to negotiate with the 4 power blocks that are in that country. In Pretoria, he negotiated with the Tigrayans and had a deal. Now, but that did not take into account, as Dr. Kanenje is saying, the Oromia region, which is one of the largest region in that country. Mm-hmm. And it does not include the Amhara, who are also a very powerful actor in that. And it has not included the Somali region, which has also been affected. So the 4 blocks, and then there are other minorities who have started asserting their own position and saying they need to be recognized as well. And what does this mean? That Ethiopia is now involved in this kind of merry-go-round of peaceful negotiations using different agencies. You use AU to mediate the Tigray war, then you use IGAD to mediate the Oromia war, then possibly you use one country to look, Somalia to look at the Somali region and all that. What it is not doing is basically confronting the demon in the house. And the demon in the house is that you are trying to dismantle a legacy of a monarchy that has never been dismantled by former leaders. The Solomonic dynasty established a hierarchy of power, where the Amhara were on the top, the Tigrayans were the soldiers, and the Oromos were the producers of food, and the Somalis were outsiders. Now, and the Somalis considered themselves outsiders from the beginning and would have liked to join the Greater Somalia. And so the Ogaden War was about the disenchantment of the Oromo. And unfortunately, all these forces became armed. So they are not just, so when they started now resisting the monarchy of Haile Selassie, and we've not included in the bloc Eritrea, because Eritrea at least managed to secede from the Ethiopian group. So what needs to be done is for Abiy to convene a convention that does not only give Ethiopia a new constitutional order away from the legacy of monarchy, but also he needs to produce a citizen out of the Ethiopian, because what we now, the citizen defined as the smallest unit in defining the state. Because currently, people are not defined as citizens, they are defined as members of the group. And Meles Zenawi, despite his enlightenment, did not go ahead to define the citizen. What he did was essentially to balkanize Ethiopia into kind of citizenship of ethnic group. The Somali region, the Amhara region, the Tigray region, and in all that configuration, where is Ethiopia? So Abiy is a very enlightened leader. I know him at a personal level. He's a very enlightened leader. He may not like some of our views, but the truth of the matter is that it is incumbent upon him now to think outside the box and help Ethiopia break from the yoke of the monarchic legacy. And that is the only way the Oromia, the Oromo people, are going to be seen as independent players. Before, they were just growers of food for the monarchy. That's all. That's all they were doing. And therefore, getting to power was none of their business. The Tigrayans still, in their small way, feel they are militarily stronger because they have the military backdrop, the military vanguard for the Ethiopian colonial state, or rather monarchy. And here we have now the Tigray, the Amhara as the leader, and they still feel aggrieved and still can go to war. Now, you need to produce a new Ethiopia, and I think the peace processes are important, but ultimately they have to produce something. Peace for its own sake does not build a country. What builds a country are institutions. And the institution that Ethiopia needs now is a new constitutional order and a new configuration of citizen. What the French call the citoyen. Yeah, you need a new citizen.
Thank you. Right, let's finally just hear from Dr. Mbog as well.
Thank you. I think Prof has literally taken it from my mouth. I currently teach a course at the MI level, the history of peace initiatives and peace processes in Africa.
Yes.
And the Horn of Africa is one of our great interests, particularly with the students I'm dealing with, many of them coming from Somalia, and of course Kenya and a few Ugandans. But the point is that the Horn of Africa region has actually seen what one can see as a decline of interterritorial conflicts. Once it was Ethiopia and Eritrea. The hostility between Kenya and Ethiopia at some point.
Yes.
So the two Sudanese fighting. What that does then, it witnesses the resurgence of intra-country conflicts. And Ethiopia is not lucky on that one because of the history of its ethnic configuration. And that is what Prof was speaking to earlier. I just wanted to reinforce his comment that any peace talks that involves trying to create the stability in Ethiopia has actually to look at this issue of the ethnic configuration of what we understand as Ethiopia, which is a product of its history, stemming from the royal regime in Ethiopia that did the ethnic configuration of what we know as Ethiopia today. If that is not deconstructed, I think any peace effort, any peace initiative, any peace process will be tantamount to actually not. Because if that is not spoken into, then these problems, if it is not involving the Oromo, it will involve the Somalis in the Ogaden region. If it's not the Somalis, it will involve the Tigrayan region. So that actually presents a very existentialist threat to the country that we call Ethiopia today.
Thank you. All right, I just wanted to, you wanted to comment on it?
Yes.
Oh, you hadn't?
No.
I thought you did. Okay.
Yeah, I think we cannot really understand the current conflicts and power relationship and power struggles in Ethiopia without looking at this history. The fact that Abyssinia was an expansionist African power that had colonized the Oromo, the Somalis, the Afars, the Gurages, and many of these communities that now constitute what we know as Ethiopia, which actually only came into existence during the Second World War. We were colonized by the British. We have gone through decolonization, and we have achieved our self-determination. But the big issue that relates to people like the Oromos, who are nearly half the population of the country, which is the largest state among the federal states, is the fact that the question of liberation, self-determination, and decolonization has not taken place in a complete way. Ethiopia has never had a national dialogue, a national conference to discuss its future. They've had strong men, like after the overthrow of the emperor, Mengistu Haile Mariam, an authoritarian system was in place for so many years. This was replaced by the TPLF, which was again. And then the coming of Abiy, who comes from outside the circle of the traditional ruling region and ruling elite, open up the space. And he liberalized, he invited the liberation movement, the political figures, he released political prisoners. And in fact, he reconciled with Eritrea, which earned him the Nobel Peace Prize. But he opened up this Pandora's box. And he didn't seem to like what he was seeing. And he seems to be trying to put it back. And that's why you have the Tigray problem. You have this insurgency and an uprising in the Oromo region. Also, we haven't spoken about the Afars. The Afars now are in an important position because Abiy has said that Ethiopia must have an outlet to the sea. And people are thinking, where would that be? Would it be through Eritrea? Would it be through the Somali Federal Republic? And the Afars are becoming important players in the sense that they occupy that territory up to the Red Sea and into Djibouti. So I think it is a very important initiative that he is now engaging the Oromo. And the Oromo Liberation Army and the Oromo Liberation Front is a significant force. And there's a lot of conflict going in the Oromo region, a lot of destabilization, a lot of killings, a lot of ethnic clashes with neighboring groups like the Amharas and so on. And I think Abiy would probably want to take the Oromo conflict off his list so that he can concentrate on the new crisis in the Amhara region, where one of the major armed groups, the Fano, are now in open rebellion against the state. And so there's a new front, the state fighting these rebels and armed groups in the Amhara region. And therefore, to a certain extent, there's a feeling that maybe being half Oromo, he needs to settle the Oromo conflict. And I think it is a welcome change that the Oromo Liberation Army leadership is now in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam. The top leadership of Ethiopia, Ridwan Hussein, and the Minister of Justice are also in Dar es Salaam. And it appears as if that there's been some significant progress in those talks to create that kind of enthusiasm that perhaps they may be on the verge of signing a peace agreement. But I think the Prime Minister needs to go beyond that. He needs to engage, he needs to call a national dialogue, as he's already had a peace dialogue after the Tigrayan Pretoria agreement. But it doesn't go far enough. And a lot of communities, ethnic communities in Ethiopia feel left out. They're not part of the decision-making process. They're not being consulted. And this piecemeal issue may not be resolving the issue, because one of the focuses of Abiy is that he wants to dismantle the ethnic-based blocks. And this is one of the bones of contention. That's why there is a rebellion in the Amhara region. He has now replaced the special police forces in all of those regions with the military. And to a certain extent, there are people who feel that he's dismantling the federal structure and creating a centralized unitary government, which I think a lot of the ethnic forces in power would not accept and would definitely resist by any means necessary.
Right, thank you. I'll be remiss if you don't really talk about Salva Kiir with his now leadership of the EAC. He is to take over leadership mantle. As even we know, states are defaulting on their dues. We can talk about also the affairs of the EAC. Is it incumbent upon every head of state who is within the EAC community to actually take roles on this mantle, on the leadership of the EAC? So does it go in circles? Right?
Yeah, I think it is necessary, because the 7 members are equal partners. And therefore, to feel involved, to feel ownership of it, obviously you should have a system which allows representation. But I think the big concern here is the viability of the East African community. Is that East African community is the most important and the fastest growing regional organization, probably in Africa, if not the world. We've done extremely well, and in some few weeks' time, Somalia would be admitted probably as the 8th member. It's growing in numbers. The numbers are over 300 million people live within the East African community. It stretches from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, now to the farthest point of the Arabian Sea. It's got a big GDP, great opportunities for trading, and then of course then we're moving towards monetary union, and eventually the big price of political federation. But we cannot do it unless these member states are committed to the upkeep and the development of the East African Community Secretariat. These countries are not paying their dues. South Sudan is one of the biggest defaulters. So you cannot be sitting in the chair when you're not paying for the upkeep of the organization that you are at the head of. And countries like Burundi, although they have been at the helm, are not making their contribution. So it's going to become difficult for just 1 or 2 countries to bear the burden of managing the East African community, and we cannot achieve the ultimate aim of African unity, given the fact that the East African community is the building blocks of that bigger picture, without paying for it. Africans must be able to, governments must be able to pay their dues to the East African community and to the African Union for these institutions to be viable, effective and powerful institutions that can push forward the aspiration of the East African people and the African people.
Right. Let's hear from Dr. Kananja briefly.
We may have to take South Sudan to CRB, for default.
That's a good one.
But it was not South Sudan alone. I mean, it's many
South
states
Sudan,
of East Africa,
Burundi, and stuff like that.
We should get a CRB list.
Yes.
For I think that's a good one.
This rotational, chairmanship, of course, is something necessary for any regional, economic or political grouping, because in law, and in politics, they're equal, but they're just not equal in shareholding. And I think we know that, you know, because countries are different. But in terms of practice, it's supposed to be equal, and that's the way it's supposed to be. But I think, is it this week that I heard that South Sudan had cleared its arrears? You know, perhaps now, you know, at the prospect of taking over the presidency or the chairmanship, they didn't want to embarrass themselves. It's an incentive for them. Then we should do this more often. Okay, we should do this.
We should actually look at the CRB list, who's actually having the most accrued defaults. Yeah, so that we can give the chairmanship.
Yeah, but I echo the sentiment of, you know, of Mheshimiwa. It is very important not to have free riding. The viability of East African community is going to depend on commitment of member states, not just to contribute to certain objectives, but fundamentally to contribute to the financing of it. A lot of us think the budget of the East African community, first of all, is too small, and so that means it cannot have a larger mandate than it should be having. If we have to practically move towards a political federation, we're going to need to have a substantially larger budget, more organization, more discipline, also more commitment. Today, we are thinking, and it looks like Somalia will be joining the East African community at the time when Salva Kiir, you know, is probably president. There are a lot of issues to deal with that. You know, with the formation of East African regional force, we're going to need a kitty. And so you can imagine when countries are actually not contributing the basics, then what will be the future of East African community?
Thank you. Right, Peter Kagwanja, briefly.
The coming of power of Salva Kiir literally puts the region in some form, I want to say, horn of a dilemma, which we may not speak about because of the diplomatic exigencies that might be consequences. Well, first and foremost, he's supposed to face election at home at some stage, and that pushes some issues about the East African community and stability of its member states. Particularly the process towards democratization. So that's one point which we must ponder. The second, of course, is the fact that Salva Kiir is a member of the EAC mediation in Sudan, and he's also a member of the East African community. And the big question is, what is the future of an independent EAC vis-a-vis EAC? Because that's something that has not been talked about. Because after this, it's only Sudan, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, which will not be the East African community. Is there necessity of having two regional blocs in the region, or should there be a working kind of division of labor, where maybe IGAD is just about this, and the East African community becomes now the regional economic bloc of the region? This becomes more important when you raise the question of Somalia's membership, because after Somalia enters the East African community, IGAD, to all intents and purposes, will be left an Ethiopian issue when it comes to the real power. And therefore, Salva Kiir's coming is not just about the change of leadership, because, as you know, the chair of the East African community is a titular head. A titular head, because what really works in the East African community is the secretariat. From the days of Francis Mudaura, to the modern times, I think it's the secretariat that makes the body, and its effectiveness is equal to the effectiveness of the secretariat. Now, for now, we cannot say that Salva Kiir is not going to actually succeed, because if Burundi, which is weaker than South Sudan, has made it through, then we are also going to make it through with Salva Kiir. But the fundamental question is whether he's going to lead us through this transfer of power, particularly between IGAD and the EAC.
Thank you. Right.
I think my colleagues have said quite a bit. I like Honorable Hassan's optimism on the EAC based on the increasing membership of the states. And Hassan is optimism, which seems to be based on the recent willingness of Sudan to pay up, and all the others who owe the money. And the issue of IGAD and the EAC, which seem to be conflicting in some sense, which has been raised by Professor Kagwanja. But mine is really, away from that optimism based on the structures of this organization, I'm more concerned about the political will among the states that are members of the EAC. Yes, the presidency or the chairmanship of Salva Kiir is important because it's coming in for the first time once Sudan has been accepted as a member. That comes with a symbolism, even at home, which will give some hope to the people of Sudan that they are members of the EAC. Salva Kiir also needs it, probably, for re-election. You never know the internal politics of South Sudan. But is there a political will in this region to bring this bloc into fruition, into the ultimate prize of a political federation? If history is anything to go by, recent history, the answer seems to me to be no. Mm-hmm. Look at the challenges between Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. Look at the challenges occasionally between Nairobi and Kampala, between Kampala and Chupa. So what I want to urge is that can we, the leaders of this region, find a way of creating the political goodwill that we need to create a viable bloc.
Thank you. Right, thank you. And of course, even as we're winding up right now, I just wanted to prime you on what is happening currently. We can see the picture here of the Prime Minister of UK. This is Sunak and President Kagame, where Britain's Supreme Court will deliver its ruling today on whether the government can go ahead with its plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda, a decision which could have far-reaching ramifications for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. And at hearings in October, government lawyers argued that the top court should overrun a ruling that the scheme to send thousands of asylum seekers more than 4,000 miles away to East Africa was unlawful, as Rwanda was not a safe third country. That is the latest. We wait to see what will be the determination. And also, we just wanted to show you what is on the front pages of The Economist. How scary is China? That is the latest copy of The Economist, as you can see today. And also, on the week, the warning sign. Should Democrats panic over Biden's poll numbers? That is what they're asking right now. Trump seems to be now leading as far as these polls are concerned. Are there any bugbears, trepidations, and fear of his coming back to the scene? That is a question. Latest development as well is that Cameron returns to frontline after Braverman sacking sparks reshuffle. That is what we have on Financial Times and other dailies as well. To stop for time, I want just to give our colleagues just a minute, because my director is chasing me away. Just to give you a closing remarks, we begin with you, Mheshimiwa. I know you're also in tearing rush to go to Parliament.
Yeah, I actually wanted to raise, given the fact that we started with an abduction on the oil issue, that on Friday, Osman Khalif, and the MCA for former MCA for South Sea, and the senior advisor to the governor of Nairobi, Johnson Sakaja, was abducted. And the police have said they have no knowledge of his whereabouts.
Till now?
Nor have they done anything to assure his family. So I'm a bit worried, and I want to say that if he is in police custody, then he should be charged in a court